Mr. Sergeant of Arms, invite the members into the chamber and close the doors. I hereby declare the House of Representatives of the 113th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee now in session. Will the members please stand? Will the visitors in the gallery please stand and remain standing through the Pledge of Allegiance? Leader Camper will serve as chaplain of the day. Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He knows my name. He knows my name. He knows my name. Yes, he knows my name. And oh, how he walks with me. And oh, how he talks with me. And oh, how he tells me I am his own. You know my name. You know my name. You know my name. You know my name. And oh, how you comfort me. And oh, how you counsel me. It still amazes me that I am your friend. I'm going to read 1 Thessalonians 5 and 18. In everything, give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. Let us pray. Thank you, Lord, for being the great I am. Thank you, Lord, for giving us the breath of life. Thank you for the leaves on the trees and the fish in the sea and everything that is, Lord. It's because of you, and we thank you. Thank you, Lord, for your new mercies every day, for your grace, for allowing us to be here, Lord, to serve the citizens of Tennessee. We thank you. We thank you for protecting our families while we are here. Because, Lord, you know, public service requires families to sacrifice. But we know you're watching them and taking care of them and putting a shield of protection around them while we're here. And we thank you. We thank you for the goodness of your grace and your mercy. It is all of these blessings we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Leader Camper, lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Roll call.
Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Mr. Speaker, 94 members present.
Let journal reflect Representative Travis is excused. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Welcoming and honoring
Welcome and honoring Representative Terry. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As it is Administrative Professionals Day, I would like to thank my legislative assistant, Megan Dix, for all the work that she does. I'd also like to recognize my intern, who's over here on the right side, who's done a great job in the health committees. Charles Lolis, please stand and let's give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Representative Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my assistant, TJ Sutton, for all the hard work she does for the 21st District. Thank you.
Representative Littleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a resolution to commemorate National Drug Endangered Children Awareness Day on April 24th, 2024. Whereas April 24th, 2024 has been declared National Drug Endangered Children Awareness Day. Whereas the month of April has been designated Child Abuse Prevention Month, and whereas drug endangered children are at risk of abuse and neglect due to their parents' or caregivers' illegal drug use, possession, manufacturing, cultivation, or distribution. And whereas children whose caretakers' substance misuse interferes with their ability to parent and provide a safe and nurturing environment, and also at risk, and whereas their multidisciplinary collaboration and community support, we can increase the likelihood of intervention occurring in the lives of these children. And whereas with intervention drug endangered children, we can move from risk to relency, and can break generational cycles of drug and child abuse, and can change the...
Representative Kiesling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm going to ask you to rise, please, for just a moment. Speaker Sexton and I, we want to honor Rebecca Foster. Rebecca was a dear friend. Rebecca Foster has passed. We just learned that this morning. Rebecca Foster is the district director for Congressman John Rowe's 6th District. Shocking. Although she has been battling cancer, this has just caught us completely off guard. We didn't realize it was this serious. She, her husband, Alan Foster, I'm sure, loving husband, Cumberland County Mayor. Rebecca's going to be missed throughout this entire district. There's no question about it. If you would, I'd like to request a moment of silence. Thank you.
Representative Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prior to Disability Day on the Hill this year, I had never considered how many Tennesseans with disabilities are tragically murdered by their caregivers or family members. During Disability Day on the Hill, back at the end of February this year, I was fortunate to have a group of disability advocates from my district come and visit my office. During that visit, they shared with me regarding the horrors that disabled individuals nationwide go through. Sadly, far too many Tennesseans are devastatingly murdered by their family members and caregivers. The very people who are supposed to love them best neglect, disregard them in worst ways imaginable. I ask for this body to rise and do a moment of silence from all those we have lost across this state.
Thank you. Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize our intern. She interned for myself and Representative Gloria Johnson, so both the 15th and the 90th District. Miss Anna Gordon up in the gallery. Let's give her a round of applause. You did a great job for us. Thank you.
Representative Vital.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, please join Representative Esther Helton and I in welcoming the Collegedale Academy Band from District 29 here to the Capitol today. They will be playing out on the East Garden steps between Cordell Hull Building and the Capitol, starting at around 11 o'clock. And if you have a moment, stick your head out and congratulate these young people. They are members of the band, the chamber orchestra, and the jazz band. So a great group of young people from Collegedale, Tennessee, and District 29. Thank you.
Representative Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, it's looking like we're probably not going to be here next week, so I wanted to take a moment to honor my wife. On Wednesday of next week, we'll be celebrating our 20th wedding anniversary. She's at home watching today, and y'all only had to put up with me for 2 years. She's had 10 times that. So if y'all don't mind giving her a round of applause. Love you, baby.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For myself and Representative Miller, we want to recognize our office staff today who's done an excellent, outstanding job of keeping both of us in order, Ms. Allison Sneed and also Mr. Warner Smith today, and our interns as well. We want to thank them for just keeping us in order and keeping us going on this day.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. Members, you'll remember that we held a moment of silence and silent prayer for those young folks who were shot in the shooting in the park in Orange Mound. And I'm going to say around a dozen because we had one or two to show up after the initial reports wounded. But we had gun violence yesterday outside of 2 of our schools, still being investigated. But I want to ask you to have a moment where you think about the trauma that this is causing our school children, those children who know the victims, whether the victims were killed or wounded, those who were
Take a moment of silence. Thank you. Representative Sparks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, well, throughout the whole session, we talk about crime. We see what Representative Hardaway is talking about, and it's really unfortunate where our culture seems to be going. I read a poll yesterday that said 72% of Americans believe one of the main reasons we're having some of these problems is the lack of fathers, lack of mentors. Let me just read you a couple of facts, members. 63% of teen suicides are from fatherless homes. 70% of juveniles are in state institutions from fatherless homes. 71% of high school dropouts are from fatherless homes. 75% of children with drug abuse problems from fatherless homes. 80% of rapists are from fatherless homes. 85% of youth in prison are from fatherless homes. 90% of homeless and runaway children are from fatherless homes. I want to challenge all of our members, including the Speaker, to visit some of our juvenile detention facilities, get involved in some of these kids' lives and mentor them. Thank you.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker. And I'd also encourage us to not incarcerate fathers so that they can be in the home. I want to recognize one of my elders and constituents who passed away, Mr. Will Coleman, and ask for a moment of silence, if you would, and if you would rise. Mr. Coleman lived on Masterson Street in Westwood. Sorry, I'm asking for a moment of silence, and if you would rise in recognition of Mr. Will Coleman. He was a 93-year-old in District 86. He lived across the street from my grandmother all of my life, so he's known me the entire time, and he just passed away. His family is very dear and near to us. They are just exemplary examples of what it means to not only have God at the head of their life, but care for community at the center of their focus. And so just keeping the Coleman family in our thoughts, prayers, and in our actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I ask you to rise once again this morning. Lewis County lost a sheriff's deputy yesterday, Brad Lawson, who was found deceased in his home. The entire community mourns. He was not only a credit to the sheriff's department, but also to the community as a whole, to his church. Please pray for the entire community and his family that survived him. And just join me in a moment of silence, please. Amen.
Welcome and honoring. Next order, Mr. Clerk. Oh, Representative Love, didn't see you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, if you would please also rise. Former teacher at Whites Creek High School, was director of the Majorettes, and her husband, Bobby Kane, was part of the Clinton 12. Margot Kane transitioned. She died a few days ago. And if you would just have a moment of silence in honor of Miss Margot Kane, one of our great leaders in education space here in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you.
Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Introduction of resolutions.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With all resolutions properly filed, be introduced pursuant to Rule number 17 and placed on the consent calendar or referred to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Senate Joint Resolutions congratulatory memorializing.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With all Senate joint resolutions congratulatory memorializing, in line that has to be placed on the consent calendar pursuant to Rule number 17.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Resolutions lying over.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that all resolutions lined over be referred to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Introduction of bills, Senate bills on first consideration, Senate bills on second consideration, House bills on second consideration, petitions and memorials. Mr. Speaker, we have a petition on the desk. We have a letter to the Honorable Tammy Letzler, Chief Clerk of the Tennessee House of Representatives. Dear Madam Clerk, please receive the attached petition for redress of grievance and request from Nathaniel Dressel of Hamlin County. Mr. Dressel makes the following assertions on behalf of himself and similarly aggrieved Tennesseans. 1, Tennessee Code Annotated Section 2-5-101 F4 is repugnant to Article 1, Section 4 of the Tennessee Constitution. 2, individuals disqualified for a party primary election be allowed candidacy on the general election ballot as an independent. And 3, Tennessee Code Annotated Section 2-5-101 F4 be repealed. Respectfully signed, Rick Eldridge, 10th Representative District.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Next order.
Reports from standing committees, reports from select committees, calendars. Mr. Speaker, the House has a consent calendar.
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move passage of the consent calendar on third and final consideration, keeping with Rule 50.
Gentleman moves passage of the consent calendar, probably second. Mr. Clerk, any objections been filed?
Mr. Speaker, item 2, House Joint Resolution 1484 has been objected to by Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Anyone seeking recognition on the consent calendar? Seeing none, we're voting on the consent calendar. All members in favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 98, no nays, 1 present, not voted.
Having received a constitutional majority, I declare the consent calendar passed without objection. The motion reconsider is tabled. Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I anticipate objection, but pursuant to Rule number 21, I move that members be limited to 1 minute in debate when recognized on any amendment on today's regular calendar.
Proper motion, probably seconded. There's objection. We're on the board. All those in favor vote aye when the bell rings. All those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 75, 23 nays.
Motion passes. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, at the time of recess yesterday, the House was on Thursday's regular calendar, ready for consideration of item 79, Item 79, House Bill 1718 by Representative Gillespie relative to conditions of bail. Mr. Speaker, Senate bills on the desk.
Representative Gillespie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2566.
Representative Gillespie moves substitute conform to Senate Bill 2566, properly seconded without objection. So ordered. Representative Gillespie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move on passage of Senate Bill 2566 on third and final consideration.
Representative Gillespie moves passage of Senate Bill 2566 on third and final consideration, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call for First Amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Holsey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's different from the Senate amendment. We move to adopt.
Chairman Holsey moves adoption of Committee Amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Committee Amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Gillespie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this bill has to do with pretrial monitoring. What that means essentially is if this bill is to pass, if you're arrested on an A, B, C, or D felony, and you live in a county that already has a pretrial monitoring system in place, and you happen to break any of the conditions of that bond that's set, you would be ordered back into custody, your bond would be revoked, and so that's pretty much the premise of the bill. Right now, that does not always happen. There's a delay in time a lot of times. And then also, in some cases, like my own county, pretrial monitoring is only happening from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. And I think we'll agree that a lot of crimes happen in other hours of the day. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Gillespie renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I make a motion to throw this bill to the heel of today's calendar.
It's a proper motion, probably seconded. We're on the board. All those in favor of rolling Senate Bill 2566 to the hill of today's calendar, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 21, 76 nays.
Motion fails. Representative Ritchie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question been called. There's objection. We're on the board. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 75, 21 nays.
Previous question prevails. We're voting. And all those in favor of Senate Bill 2566 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 81, 16 nays, one present not voting.
Senate Bill 2566, having received a constitutional majority, everybody declare passed without objection. Most reconsider stable. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2814 by Representative Gillespie and others relative to drag racing.
Representative Gillespie, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage on House Bill 2814 on third and final consideration.
Representative Gillespie moves passage, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, any amendments been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Representative Gillespie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I've been in front of you all many times on this topic of reckless driving and drag racing. It's unfortunately still something that's plaguing our communities, both urban and rural. And all this is doing is simply increasing the penalty for drag racing or organized street racing from a Class A misdemeanor to a Class E felony. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Gillespie renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Dixie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to request to re-roll this bill to the next available calendar, next available date.
It's a proper motion, probably seconded. There's objection. We're on the board. This is going to be a long day. All those in favor of rolling this bill to the hill of today's calendar, vote aye. Next available space on next available counter, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 20, 77 nays.
Motion fails. Representative Warner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question been called. Is there objection? There's objection. We're on the board. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 75, 21 nays.
Previous question prevails. We're on the bill. All those in favor of House Bill 2814, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Sapicki, aye. McKenzie. Hardaway, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 86, 11 nays, 1 present not voting.
House Bill 2814 and received a constitutional majority. I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion reconsider table. Go on next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2959 by Representative Hardaway, relative to incarcerated parents. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Garrett, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I move House Bill 2959 to the hill of this calendar.
It's proper motion, probably seconded. There's objection. Is there objection? Oh, okay. We're on the board. All those in favor are rolling. House Bill 2959 to the hill of today's calendar. Vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 68, 25 nays.
Motion prevails. On next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2545 by Representative Martin, relative to medical laboratory operations in hospital setting. Mr. Speaker, Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Martin, you're recognized. Oh. Representative Martin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to SB 2230.
Representative Martin moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2230, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Representative Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of SB 2230 on third and final consideration.
Representative Martin moves passage of Senate Bill 2230 on third and final consideration, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Health Committee Amendment number 1, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Martin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This here is the Tennessee Medical Laboratory Act. What we're addressing are 3 different areas to help rural healthcare in Tennessee. 1, strengthening rural healthcare by better defining rural health-based laboratories. Number 2, helps protect existing licensure accreditation procedures in Tennessee. And 3rd, allows technical laboratory supervisors to see up to 5 rural hospital lab settings. With that, I renew my motion.
Representative Martin renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Dixie.
A quick question is, how, with this says they can up to do 5 hospital-based laboratories, is there a geographical mileage in that area, or is it just 5 total? It doesn't matter how close or how far they are away.
Representative Martin.
This is just based upon the rural hospital-based laboratory definition of where the rural-based hospital would be. So there's not necessarily a definition of the amount of space.
Representative Dixie.
So is this just for labs, or is this labs in hospitals or rural hospitals?
Representative Martin.
This is the labs within the rural hospitals.
Representative Dixie.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Pearson.
Coming up. Thank you. And I'm not going to play any games because it's not funny to keep rolling bills and things like that when we got real questions like this. Let's do our jobs. Let's listen to bills. Let's listen to bills. Let's vote them up or down, but do your job.
Hey, Representative Pearson, we're on this bill. I appreciate the conversation, but you have a question for Representative Martin. Representative Pearson.
Yeah, on this bill related to rural hospital sponsor, there's a question related to this legislation, having read it. what impact does this mean for the hospitals that are currently there in rural communities? Is this looking to make it easier for more hospitals to potentially be in rural areas? I'm just trying to get a clarity about the effect of this legislation on rural communities.
Representative Martin.
Thank you, Representative. Yes, this is helping break down some of the barriers that we're seeing in our rural hospital, because currently it's 1-to-1 ratio, which is putting a need in there. So when we take this away and allow 5, it's going to help us reach more services in those rural areas. So it's going to help us serve more in that rural area without the restrictions from that.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. And is the idea that one potential hospital conglomerate would be able to serve those 5, or that one hospital would be able to have sort of 5 satellites as it relates to the communities that they serve? Because I do know, and a lot of people here represent rural areas, and I got a rural part of mine, a lot of hospitals are closing. And so just how is this helping to fit and meet that need?
Thank you, Representative. Yeah, this is helping fit that need because we're going to allow to serve more hospitals. So currently this is a barrier, and it will reduce that so that, like in my district specifically, this is going to allow 2 other hospitals to be able to be serviced by groups to serve our community.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, sponsor, for answering the questions.
Shaw. Representative Shaw, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Call for the question on the bill.
Question's been called. Any objection? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2230 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Ms. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 98, 1 nay.
Senate Bill 2230 having received constitutional majority, everybody declare passed without objection. Most reconsider table. Next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1826 by Representative Martin, relative to coverage of rapid whole genome sequencing. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Martin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to SB 1762.
Representative Martin moves to substitute and conform Senate Bill 1762, properly seconded without objection. So ordered. Representative Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of SB 1762 on third and final consideration.
Representative Martin moves passage of Senate Bill 1762 on third and final consideration. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it first amendment.
House Insurance Committee Amendment Number 1, same as Senate Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Kumar, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the same as a Senate amendment. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Martin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this bill here is a great healthcare policy, in my opinion. It benefits the patient, it benefits the parent, benefits the doctor, and also Tennessee taxpayers. So currently in Tennessee, our most chronically ill children are sitting in our NICUs and PICUs for up to 12 to 16 months without a diagnosis. A lot of those costs are then falling back on the state. The parent isn't getting answers. The doctor doesn't know exactly which steps to go. So what this bill will do will allow TennCare the opportunity to perform genome, or to allow genome sequencing to be done on those children that meet specific qualifications. So what that will do is reduce the diagnosis time from 12 to 16 months down to 5 to 7 days, which is going to get us a diagnosis quicker, help get these kids out of our NICU and PICU, and also help those parents with their peace of mind. So with that, I stand ready for question.
Representative Martin renews his motion. Any discussion? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move for previous question.
Previous question been called. Is there objection? Seeing none, we're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1762 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 97, no nays.
Senate Bill 1762 and received constitutional majority. Everybody declare passed without objection. Most reconsider table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2781 by Representative Parkinson, relative to professions. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Parkinson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Substitute conform.
I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2732.
Representative Parkinson moves substitute and conform Senate Bill 2732. Probably second without objection. So ordered. Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage.
Representative Parkinson moves passage of Senate Bill 2732 on third and final consideration. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call it first amendment.
House Commerce Committee Amendment Number 1. Mr. Speaker, it's the same as Senate Amendments 1 and 2 combined.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're going to move to withdraw those amendments.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Parkinson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this bill does, it creates the cosmetology compact. And with us passing this bill, it puts us at the table on the front end, you know, with a multi-state compact so that we can have a multi-state license. This bill also keeps intact Tennessee direct license. So anyone that's a licensed Tennessee stylist or barber, they can continue to do that. With that, Mr. Speaker, I move passage.
Representative Parkinson renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Gant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question been called. Is there objection? Seeing none, we're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2732, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, is any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 85, 8 nays, 1 present, not voting.
Senate Bill 2732, having received constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. Most reconsider table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
2062 by Representative Sparks, relative to street racing. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Sparks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to substitute conform to Senate Bill 2665.
Representative Sparks moves to substitute conform to Senate Bill 2665 without objection. So ordered. Representative Sparks.
Mr. Speaker, I move passage of Senate Bill 2665 on third and final consideration.
Representative Sparks moves passage of Senate Bill 2665 on third and final consideration. Second, Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
Mr. Speaker, we have Amendment 1 by Johnson and Montgomery. Mr. Speaker, it was not timely filed.
Deputy Speaker Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment simply names this bill after Jake Barnhart. Jake Barnhart was a constituent of Representative Burkhart and Representative Glenn and myself from Montgomery County. He was tragically killed in an illegal speed racing by a driver that was going over 100 miles an hour. Jake was on his way to pick his kids up from school. He was a 15-year Special Forces combat veteran that served our country for over 15 years. That's what the amendment does. I move to adopt.
Consideration.
Move for consideration, Mr. Speaker.
You've heard the motion, probably second. We're voting for consideration of amendment number 1. All those in favor of considering amendment number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, as any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, this is for consideration. Please take the vote.
Ayes 98, no nays.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having received the necessary 2/3 vote, the motion to consider amendment number 1 prevails. Deputy Speaker Johnson.
Move passage.
Deputy Speaker Johnson moves passage of amendment number 1. Proper motion, probably seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, we're on the board. All those in favor of adopting amendment number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, is any member which change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 99, no nays.
Receiving constitutional majority, amendment number 1 passes. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Sparks, you're recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, if I could call on Representative Jason Powell. He doesn't want me to call on him, but I'm going to call on him anyways.
Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to thank Representative Sparks for working on this bill. We had a meeting last summer with the Colonel of the Highway Patrol and discussed this issue because it's a statewide issue and wanted to figure out the best ways we could address speed racing in our communities because this truly is an issue that has become statewide, and people have weaponized their vehicles doing the speed racing. And I appreciate Representative Sparks bringing this bill to make sure that we get all the interested parties together in law enforcement to make sure that we bring it in and come up with some great solutions to deal with the issue of speed racing in our communities. So I appreciate our opportunity to speak, and I hope all members will support this legislation. Thank you.
Representative Sparks.
Mr. Speaker, members, if I get your attention.
Representative Sparks.
Mr. Speaker, this is a problem that's plagued our state, no doubt. And I know Representative Powell is trying to give me credit, but really this is his idea. And it just goes to show members that every now and then Democrats do have some good ideas. So with that being said, I just move for passage, Speaker.
You renewed your
I renewed
motion, please? Yes, yes. All right. Seeing no further discussion, any objection to the question? Seeing none, we're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2665, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 92, no nays.
Senate Bill 2665 having received a constitutional majority, everybody declare passed without objection. The motion reeks here is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2743 by Representative Stevens, relative to in-state tuition for family members of persons serving in the military. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Stevens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2664.
Representative Stevens moves substitute conform Senate Bill 2664 without objection. So ordered. Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2664 on third and final consideration.
Representative Stevens moves passage of Senate Bill 2664 on third and final consideration. By second, Ms. Clerk, call First Amendment.
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Representative Stevens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill ensures that military families can receive the benefit of in-state tuition should a reassignment result in a temporary family separation. And with that, I move.
Renew your motion.
Renew my motion.
Representative Stevens renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Moon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Without objection, previous question. So ordered. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2664 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member votes, any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 96, no nays.
Senate Bill 2664 having received a constitutional majority, everybody declare passed without objection. The motion reeks here is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1980 by Representative Wright, relative to property taxes. Mr. Speaker, Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Wright, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1882.
Representative Wright moves substitute conform to Senate Bill 1882, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Representative Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1882 on third and final consideration.
Representative Wright moves passage of Senate Bill 1882 on third and final consideration. Probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Local Government Committee Amendment number 1, same as to Amendment number 1.
Chairman Crawford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same as Senate Amendment number 1, move to withdraw.
Without objection, Amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Wright, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a Senate Bill 1882, applies only to a state licensed retirement home known as Shannondale, a 501c3 nonprofit located in Knox County in the city of Knoxville. The recently rebuilt facility and the new construction was placed on property tax rolls. While it had previously been exempt from property tax, they missed the deadline in 2022 to update the property tax exemption. Subsequently, they applied and received exemption for 2023 going forward tax. The only tax year at issue here is 2022. This bill amends legislation the General Assembly passed unanimously in 2018 for East Tennessee Children's Hospital under similar circumstances and allows the city and county to refund the 2022 property tax for the retirement home. With that brief explanation, I renew my motion, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Wright renews his motion. Representative Lafferty, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question been called. Is there objection? Hearing none, we're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1882, vote Vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 94, no nays, one present, not voting.
Senate Bill 1882 having received a constitutional majority, everybody declare passed without objection. Most read series table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2820 by Representative Camper relative to state funding for the 20th and 30th judicial districts. Mr. Speaker, Senate bills on the desk.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to roll this bill one space.
Without objection, roll one space.
Thank you.
Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1862 by Chairman Faison relative to physician assistants. Mr. Speaker, Senate bills on the desk.
Chairman Faison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1727.
Chairman Faison moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1727, properly seconded without objection. So ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage Senate Bill 1727 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Faison moves passage of 1727 on third and final consideration. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Health Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt.
Chairman Terry moves adoption of Committee Amendment number 1. Properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of adopting Committee Amendment number 1, say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt the next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
No further amendments, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Faison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Chairman Faison renews this motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move for previous question.
Previous question been called. Any objection? Seeing none, we're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1727 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 93, one nay, one present, not voting.
Senate Bill 1727 and received a constitutional majority. Everybody declare passed without objection. Most read series table. Call next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that brings the body back to item 88, House Bill 2820 by Leader Camper, relative to state funding for the 20th and 30th judicial districts. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Leader Camper, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move passage of House Bill 2820. Senate, I'm substituting and conforming to Senate Bill 2730.
Leader Camper moves substitute and conform Senate Bill 2730, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move passage on Senate Bill 2730 on third and final consideration.
Leader Camper moves passage of Senate Bill 2730 on third and final consideration. Probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Finance, Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same as the Senate amendment. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Leader Camper, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, what this bill does, in Shelby County and Davidson County, our public defenders and district public defenders conference became public defenders organizations before the statewide conference was created. So our funding is separate from state funding. What happens is when we give a raise, sometimes that's not parity with respect to the other 93 counties. So what this bill does is ensure that there's parity with all of the public defenders, all the ADAs across the state. In Shelby County and Davidson County, our counties set the salary and put in funding for our public defenders and assistant district attorneys. So this is creating parity across all 95 counties. Yeah, move to, and I renew my motion.
Leader Camper renews her motion. Any discussion? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I call for the previous question.
Previous question been called. Is there any objection? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2730, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 97, no nays.
Senate Bill 2730 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed by objection. Most reconsidered table. Let the journal reflect Representative Harris excused. Next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1863 by Chairman Faison relative to dietitian licensure compact. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Faison, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1862.
Chairman Faison moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1862, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1862 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Faison moves passage of Senate Bill 1862 on third and final consideration. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Health Committee Amendment number 1, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Terry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Faison, you are recognized.
I renew my motion.
Chairman Faison renews the motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question been called. Any objection? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1862, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 91, nay.
Senate Bill 1862 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed by objection. Most reconsidered table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2120 by Chairman Faison and others relative to eminent domain. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Faison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1984.
Chairman Faison moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1984, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1984 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Faison moves passage of Senate Bill 1984 on third and final consideration, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Civil Justice Committee Amendment number 1, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 2 by Representative Pearson. Mr. Speaker, was not timely filed.
Representative Pearson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Speaker. Look, all of these laws dealing with eminent domain, and you brought one up previously, are extremely near and dear to me. Taking up people's property and land is just not something that I am supportive of, and want that to be a very rigorous and intentional process when and if it does occur, and who gets the right to use eminent domain is extremely important. This amendment is a clarification that the brownfield section of your legislation will be removed because we passed legislation that would allow private entities to be able to rehabilitate those brownfield sites, thereby making a private entity have the same power of a public entity using it for public purposes. And so this seeks to just remove that exception within this legislation so that we can keep very strong eminent domain laws in our state, which I believe are extremely important to my constituents and I hope to yours too. And so with that, I move for consideration.
You've heard the motion, probably second. We're voting for consideration of amendment number 2. All those in favor of considering amendment number 2, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 22, 71 nays, 1 present, not voting.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having failed to receive the necessary 2/3 vote, the motion to consider amendment number 2 fails. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 3 by Representative Pearson. Mr. Speaker, was not timely filed.
Representative Pearson, you recognize.
Thank you, Speaker and colleagues. Look, again, protecting people's private property rights and protecting the property rights of Tennesseans is something that I hold with the utmost regard, and I hope that more of you will in supporting this amendment. I would like to keep, Chairman Faison, the language that says public use does not include recreational facilities, recreational purposes, or parks, private use or benefit, or the indirect public benefits resulting from private economic development and private commercial enterprise, including increased tax revenue and increased employment opportunity. I think that's a very, very, very strong definition. But once we start allowing for the exceptions that come after this legislation, I believe that it opens up way more access of entities to use the power of eminent domain and to take individuals' land, which is not something that I could ever support or be for, and I'm deeply concerned about. But having this strong definition, I think, is a good idea. So I move for
You've heard the motion, probably second. We're voting for consideration of amendment number 3. All those in favor of considering amendment number 3, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 20, 72 nays.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having failed to receive the necessary 2/3 vote, the motion to consider amendment number 3 fails. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Faison, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this bill simply says eminent domain cannot be used for recreational purposes. Move passage. Renew my motion.
Chairman Faison renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Shaw.
Previous question on bill.
Previous question been called. Any objection? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1984, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 79, 16 nays, 1 present, unvoted.
Senate Bill 1984, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed without objection. Most to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2732, but Chairman Faison, relative to wildlife resources, Mr. Speaker, Senate Bill is on the desk.
Chairman Faison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute conform to Senate Bill 2605.
Chairman Faison moves substitute conform to Senate Bill 2605, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2605 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Faison moves passage of Senate Bill 2605 on third and final consideration, probably seconded. Ms. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment number 1, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Keisling, you're
Thank
recognized.
you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment 1 is the same as the Senate amendment. We move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Faison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Section 1 of this bill provides the TWRA appropriate authority to manage Lake Hartford and its unique amenities, as well as some other agency lakes, consistent with community expectations. And finally, the bill makes clarifications that a possession permit is not also required if one holds a propagation permit. I renew my motion.
Chairman Faison renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Travis, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question been called. Any objection? Hearing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2605, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 89, 5 nays, 1 present, unvoted.
Senate Bill 2605, having received a constitutional majority, everybody declare passed without objection. Most reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2323 by Chair Lady Hazelwood and others relative to sentencing.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 2323 on third and final consideration.
Chair Lady Hazelwood moves passage by second. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Finance, Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1.
Vice Chairman Baum, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt and defer to the sponsor for an explanation.
Vice Chairman Baum moves adoption of Committee Amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of adopting Committee Amendment number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill, the amendment that we just passed, names this bill the Chris Wright bill. Chris Wright was one of my constituents about this time last year. He's a young man. He graduated from high school with my daughter-in-law, had 3 children, the youngest of which was just a couple of months old at the time of this tragedy. He was in downtown Chattanooga He was shot in the back of the head, and this is on video, so there's no question about what happened. He was shot by a man who had over 27 convictions for misdemeanors, but the man had never been declared a felon. He had been in and out of jail. Because he was only a misdemeanor, he legally could carry a firearm. And this young man, the father of 3, the son of constituents, he grew up on Signal Mountain. This young man is no longer with us. It's a huge loss for him. But the situation is not just about Chris Wright. It's about the misdemeanors that you have in your community that have offended over and over and over again with little or no punishment. So this bill would say that upon your 6th misdemeanor, you would become a Class E felon. If you continue to offend, then that stepladder would go up. There are some offenses: domestic assault, assault on a first responder, sexual abuse. There are some other misdemeanors that on your 4th offense, and these are all listed, they're itemized in the bill, but any combination of those would ratchet your punishment, your sentencing up, and it would declare you a felon and therefore take away some of these rights that have continued to allow these people to roam our streets. We have people in Hamilton County who have over 100 misdemeanors on their record. This man, as I said, had over 27. That's in addition to misdemeanors that he had on his record from adjoining states. We, like many of you, live in a border area. And so if these folks go back and forth, this bill would say that if the misdemeanor in another state by the same qualifications, that would be included when you're looking at these numbers. There is a reset button, if you will. We recognize people sometimes make mistakes. They get with a bad crowd. They do things that they later regret and change their lives, turns their lives around. So if you go 10 years without a misdemeanor, without an offense, and you have another offense, then the clock is started over. So you don't automatically ratchet up to a felon at that point. With that explanation, Mr. Speaker, I would renew my motion.
Shirley Hazelwood renews her motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Warner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question been called. There's objection. We're on the board. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 72, 21 nays.
Previous question prevails. We're voting. All those in favor of House Bill 2323 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 89, 7 nays, 1 present, not voting.
House Bill 2323 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed by objection. Most reconsider is tabled. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1614 by Chair Lady Hazelwood and others relative to the Protect Tennessee Minors Act. Mr. Speaker, Senate bills on the desk.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1792.
Chair Lady Hazelwood moves substitute and conform Senate Bill 1792, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1792 on third and final consideration.
Chair Lady Hazelwood moves passage of Senate Bill 1792 on third and final consideration. Probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call for First Amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1, same as Senate Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Halsey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's the same as the Senate amendment. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is the age verification bill that would require those websites that provide pornographic materials to verify the age of the person who is accessing those materials. This bill simply puts the cyber community in concert with what we do in the physical world. We do not allow minors to go into adult establishments. We do not allow minors access to written materials that are inappropriate. This bill would do the same thing in the cyber world, as I said. It's a critical importance because there's a great deal of in-depth research and data that shows exposure to these kind of materials at a young age is very damaging to our children. So this is a way to protect our children in Tennessee. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would renew my motion.
Chair Lady Hazelwood renews the motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Gant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
First question been called. Objection. Seeing none, we're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1792, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 96, no nays.
Senate Bill 1792, I received a constitutional majority. I by clerk pass without objection. Most reconsider table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2325 by Chair Lady Hazelwood relative to Artificial Intelligence Advisory Council.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 2325 on third and final consideration.
Chair Lady Hazelwood moves passage. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Keesling, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We move to withdraw Amendment 1, please.
Without objection, Amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Finance Ways and Means Committee Amendment Number 1 filed as House Amendment 2.
Vice Chairman Baum, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt and defer to the sponsor for an explanation.
Vice Chairman Baum moves adoption of Committee Amendment number 2. Probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of Committee Amendment number 2 vote aye. Say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, we have House Amendment 3 by Representative Jones. Mr. Speaker, it was not timely filed. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, pursuant to our rules, that member may not be recognized for any purpose for the remainder of this legislative day.
Chairman Clemens. Would you like to approach? Chairman Clemens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I move to consider this amendment, I would ask that the clerk read it so that people know what we're voting on.
Is there there's objection? We're on the board. All those in favor of the clerk reading the amendment, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Is that right, Mr. Clerk? Vote no if you're opposed. Mr. Clerk. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 21, 73 nays.
Motion fails. Chairman Clemens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so what this amendment would do is require the advisory council to submit an action plan to the governor addressing how to position this state competitively to assure its citizens capture the full economic benefit from AI opportunities and how to responsibly leverage AI to improve the efficiency of state and local government services and best practices regarding monitoring and studying the use of artificial intelligence in elections and campaign advertising in the state of Tennessee. This is a more than reasonable amendment. I would ask for y'all's consideration on behalf of my colleague.
You've heard the motion, probably seconded. We're voting for consideration of amendment number 3. All those in favor of considering amendment number 3, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 24, 72 nays.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having failed to receive the necessary two-thirds vote, the motion to consider amendment number 3 fails. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairlady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill would just set up a task force, a council to deal with the Tennessee Artificial Intelligence Advisory Council. It would have 24 members. And what this council would be charged with is looking at how artificial intelligence can be used by our state government, by businesses, to make our government more efficient and make sure that we're using it effectively, but also safely. This bill would require the council to submit an interim status report by May 1st, 2025, and an annual report by December 31st of 2025, and each December 31st of 26 and 27. The final report from this council would be due on December 31st of 2028, and that would include principles and values that would guide AI use in state government, how we would framework policies for the development and deployment of AI in state government, and related issues. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairlady Hazelwood renews her motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Spicky.
Move previous question.
Previous question been called. Any objection? Seeing none. All those in favor, House Bill 2325 is amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 92, 1 nay, 3 present, unvoted.
House Bill 2325, having received a constitutional majority, and hereby declare passed without objection. Most read series table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2940 by Representative Hicks of Washington relative to TennCare.
Representative Hicks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 2940 on third and final consideration.
Representative Hicks moves passage by second. Mr. Clerk, any amendments been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Representative Hicks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, it's an honor to carry and present the Working Individuals with Disabilities Act. I may be the sponsor, but this is represented by this entire body. This is bipartisan legislation that will create a new path for Tennesseans with disabilities. Life's lessons has taught me that there are a number of things that makes us who we are, that defines us and keeps us on a path moving forward. That's what House Bill 2940 is all about. It keeps Tennesseans with disabilities moving forward by allowing them to go to work and keep their Medicaid long-term supports and services. Thank goodness, through research and innovation, folks with disabilities have more opportunities than ever before. We believe that they should be able to go to work and pay 5% of their earnings in and keep their TennCare. And for those that are already working that have private insurance, they can pay into TennCare so they can receive home health care. Mr. Speaker, with that, I renew my motion.
Representative Hicks renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hicks and sponsor, I just want to thank you for this. This truly is a bipartisan piece of legislation, as evidenced by those who surround you in the well this morning, by those who have chosen to co-sponsor this legislation. I would encourage everyone to consider co-sponsoring this legislation. This is truly a bipartisan piece of policy that will benefit people's lives, you and those who worked with you on this in this body, and those in the employees of this great state who helped you with this piece of legislation are to be commended. And I thank you for this.
Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for those comments. At this time, I'd like to recognize Representative Jernigan, please, Speaker.
Representative Jernigan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is, I'm so very, very proud of this legislation. We were a little bit behind, 47 6 states had this legislation, but we've caught up today. This is going to be incredible to allow. If it's similar to Katie Beckett, because I had an individual contact me earlier, or last year, who was in a car accident, who was working and wanted to go back to work and had to get a divorce because he was making too much money to be able to get benefits to get on TennCare. So this will allow people that want to work. This is a jobs bill, but the people that want to work and to be able to pay in. And if you are on Medicaid, there are so many that wanted to work but couldn't because they would lose their benefits. This will allow them to also work and become taxpayers and give back a little bit because they just want to be able to enjoy quality of life that's going to lead to home ownership, that's going to lead to transportation, that's going to lead to making their lives better, both socially, professionally, and otherwise. So thank you, Representative, for carrying this for us. You've been a steward, and I appreciate it. And we just don't have the words on what this means to the community. Thank you.
Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I'm proud to be from a state that never shies away from creating jobs and believing that hard work pays off, and it does pay off. I believe that that's a big reason why we're the volunteer state. This will help a strong state even grow stronger and really help those with disabilities. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Hicks renews his motion. Any objection to the question? Seeing none, we're voting. All those in favor of House Bill 2940 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 98, no nays.
House Bill 2940 having received constitutional majority, hereby clerk passed by objection to motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1659 by Chairman Hicks, relative to public officers and employees.
Chairman Hicks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1659 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Hicks moves passage by second. Mr. Clerk, any amendments been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Chairman Hicks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 1659 raises the base salary for district attorney generals and district public defenders. With that, I renew my motion.
Chairman Hicks renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1659 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 97, no nays.
House Bill 1659 having received constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed by objection. Most reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2176 by Representative Lynn, relative to public meetings. Mr. Speaker, Senate bills on the desk.
Representative Lynn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1963.
Representative Lynn moves substitute and conform Senate Bill 1963, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Representative Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1963 on third and final consideration. Members, this bill will strengthen our sunshine law.
Representative Lynn moves passage of Senate Bill 1963 on third and final consideration, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment number 1, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Kiesling, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment 1 is the same as Senate amendment. We move to withdraw.
Chairman Kiesling. Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Lynn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, as I said, this bill will strengthen our sunshine law for our citizens. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Lynn renews her motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1963 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 95, no nays, one present, not voting.
Senate Bill 1963 having received constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed by objection. The motion reads serious table. Leader Lambert, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to take up item number 72, House Bill 1807 by Butler at this time.
Proper motion, probably seconded. Any objection? Without objection, so ordered. Next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that's item 72, House Bill 1807 by Representative Butler relative to building inspections. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Butler, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1735.
Representative Butler moves substitute form Senate Bill 1735, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Representative Butler.
I move passage of Senate Bill 1735 on third and final consideration.
Representative Butler moves passage of Senate Bill 1735 on third and final consideration. Probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Commerce Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're moving to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Finance Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1 filed as House Amendment 2.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same as the Senate amendment. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 2 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Butler, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This legislation simply requires the state of Tennessee that is doing new and renovated construction inspections to complete those inspections within 10 business days of the request. With that, I renew my motion.
Representative Butler renews the motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1735 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 92, 1 nay, 4 present, not voting.
Senate Bill 1735, I received constitutional majority. Everybody declare passed by objection. Most read serious table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk. Oh, Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to take up House Bill 1924, item 74 on today's calendar by Representative Butler.
Proper motion, probably seconded. Any objection? Without objection, so ordered. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1924 by Representative Butler relative to indecent exposure. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Butler, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2337.
Representative Butler moves substitute and form Senate Bill 2337 without objection, so ordered. Representative Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2337 on third and final consideration.
Representative Butler moves passage of Senate Bill 2337 on third and final consideration. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Representative Butler, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This legislation simply holds those individuals that are incarcerated in our state penitentiaries and other facilities accountable for indecent exposure. Once they have gone through due process, their sentence shall be extended for 2 weeks and moved from a misdemeanor to a Class C felony. With that, I renew my motion.
Representative Butler renews the motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker and sponsor. While I understand somewhat your intent, I'm not a believer in mandatory minimums. I don't believe further incarceration leads to better outcomes, and there's no research that proves that either. And so I believe there already is legislation related to mandatory minimums that passed through this state house. They don't work. They don't ensure that people are rehabilitated or are actually going to be a part of our community and become better citizens because of it. This legislation doesn't have any exceptions that I can see that relates to the mental capabilities or stability of certain individuals with potential intellectual disabilities. Again, it's pushing forward mandatory minimums, extending people's sentences. And in fact, as you articulated, it's going from a misdemeanor to a felony. And so people might actually lose their right to vote. There's the consequences of this, and the support of the carceral state that this would have just is not something that I can support. The millions and millions and millions of dollars, billions of dollars that we're putting into incarceration could be better spent in preventing people from being incarcerated in the first place. And so for those reasons, I can't support your legislation. Thank you, Speaker and sponsor.
Representative Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm going to have to disagree with my colleague. If these individuals can't follow the rules and procedures inside a penitentiary, I can't see how they can follow rules of society and not be conducting themselves in inappropriate ways. And there are multiple examples, and I won't get into all those, but there was one recently in West Tennessee where an inmate was released early and had numerous infractions inside the prison. And arguably, we would have a woman still alive today that's been in place. With that, I renew my motion.
Representative Butler renews his motion. Representative Clemens. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Pearson.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that, but it isn't the responsibility of this body to extend people's time and time being incarcerated. There's no evidence that you have that is research-based that says that someone who spends more time in prison is going to be better off. The reality is, it's called the Department of Corrections. People are supposed to be getting the resources that they need while they are incarcerated so that the behavior that they have had gets corrected. It isn't just the responsibility to warehouse people and hope that they come out better. Like, that's asinine. That if you don't provide any educational resources, social resources, mental health care, physical health care, that somehow people are going to be better when they get out of prison. That's not sensible. That won't work. And so the idea that extending people's time will somehow improve their outcomes is false. Now, there are horrible instances where people have been let out of prison, and everybody in this chamber seems to have a story about an individual who, if they were in prison just a little bit longer, someone would be alive. The other truth to that is, if those individuals potentially have been given the resources that they needed from being a child until being an adult person, had they been given all the resources that they needed, they also would have never committed a crime in the first place. And so you can't just think about one side of the equation and view the totality of a person as the worst mistake that they've made, as Brian Stevenson would say. We have to think about, as legislators and as people of goodwill trying to do good things, how do we prevent this from happening in the first place? And what must we do, or millions of dollars or billions of dollars of resources must we input into communities to prevent people from being incarcerated? How do we stop talking about how we deal with extending people's prison sentences? How do we increase the amount of penalties and instead be preventative to people being incarcerated in the first place? And yes, there's a level of individual responsibility that I know many will talk about, but there is also a responsibility of those who are in positions of power to create the best conditions possible for our constituents and our communities to thrive. We are failing to do that. And so in your response, not just mentioning one side of the equation, but that there's a totality of an individual's life experiences that has led to these moments. And again, I do not believe it is our responsibility to adjudicate people's sentences. We have judges for that. There's a whole different branch, co-equal branch of government for that. And so for these reasons, I still remain opposed to your legislation. Thank you, Speaker and sponsor.
Representative Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate your comments. However, I'm all about grace and giving folks a second chance, but they still got to be held accountable regardless of their upbringing or the situations that they've faced. And I encourage people to extend grace. But in this accountability, we have to respect our correctional officers and the folks working inside our prisons and hold these people accountable for their actions when we have instances where we have inmates that have continually exposed themselves 6 and 7 times in less than 3 months when they had no prior related conviction for indecent exposure and they're acting out inside the prison. It is not right for us not to hold them accountable and have some respect and appreciate our correctional officers and the jobs they do. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Clemens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly understand your position, sponsor, but to echo the sentiments of my colleague from Shelby County, let me give you a real-world example of how this goes wrong. So in representing an inmate several years ago, we had attempted to reach this inmate. He had been acting out in the facility, had been punished and given bad time for acting out in the facility. He went into the facility with known mental health issues, was provided no treatment or proper medication in that facility. His mental health deteriorated to the point where the young man, who was 19 years of age at the time, was walking around in circles in his segregated cell, completely nude, smearing feces on the wall. Now, I was told that he was acting out and that he was just trying to behave in an indecent manner and it was guilty of indecent exposure. This young man, a black male, 19 years old, who had never left East Nashville, was talking gibberish because his mental health had deteriorated so badly that he couldn't even speak intelligible English. They tried to tell me that he was speaking Spanish. And they continued to punish him over and over because our privatized prisons have the ability to add bad time unilaterally and get paid by the day more and more. So fortunately, we were able to get this young man the assistance he needed, get him transferred out of that hellhole into a rehab facility, and get him a semblance of the care that he deserved and needed. Now, if this had been in place, he would have been accused or convicted of a felony because of an issue he could not control, of no fault of his own, known mental health issues, no medication, no mental health care while he's incarcerated, complete deterioration of his mental state, ultimately behaving in a manner you and I may consider to be indecent, but have no fault of his own, arguably, and the Sixth Circuit deemed this to be the case as well. So I would ask you and just ask for recognition, whereas my colleague argued this point eloquently, given this real-world example of how this can play out. And look, I'm openly admitted, there are people in prison who are acting out. They should not be doing that, but they're going to do it because they see no option for hope. They see no light at the end of the tunnel. You can't control what some people are going to do, but there are some people who have mental health issues and no control over this, who aren't getting the assistance they need, and they should not be unfairly punished. So I would ask that we create exceptions for those individuals with known mental health disabilities, or when we should have known that they had a mental health disability based on their intake data when they are taken into that facility. With that exception in this bill, it would be acceptable, but I don't see that in this piece of legislation. I would ask for your consideration of that. It would require you rolling this bill a few spaces and introduce an amendment to create a mental health exception. But if you're not willing to do that, then I still reiterate my objections to this piece of legislation. And thank you for hearing this real-world example. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to address it's an unfortunate circumstance for that individual, but this piece of legislation requires due process. They have to be convicted through due process. This is not something done internally in the prison. So I think if you go back and you read the statute 39-13-511, it says they have to intentionally expose themselves, the genital area or the buttocks. And I would attest in your situation that would probably not apply. So I think it does have parameters in there to allow things like that. With that, I renew my motion.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, but the intent element simply doesn't exist when someone is mentally incapacitated, and that often isn't taken into consideration, and that is often overlooked, and deference is usually given to the incarcerator rather than the incarcerated, and that is a real injustice to that individual and poses a real threat to them. So with that, I continue my objection. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. And to the sponsor, I was trying to get some clarity on whether those who are mentally and intellectually disabled had a pathway to make that claim in terms of due process, as you referred to it. And in hearing the exchange back and forth with you and Chairman Clemens, I didn't hear it expressed, so I'm simply going to ask that question. I support efforts, as you know, to make sure that our Department of Corrections are tight, that the rules are followed, and if the rules are followed, then it tends to protect the staff and the inmates. There's order. But I can't support this if I don't know that there's some allowance for a path for those who have intellectual challenges, mental health issues, to be able to make that claim before there. And this seems to, you said that there's due processes, this is that, seems to me to be administrative, but correct me if I'm wrong, does this have to go to court, or will this be a Department of Corrections administrative action?
Representative Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, this has to go to court. To answer that question first, the due process is the district attorney would have to prosecute these individuals. They would be provided a public defender if they didn't have their own attorney to represent them in the process. And so I think to address your mental health question, the TCA code says they have to intentionally expose themselves. And I think my Davidson County colleague, if they don't have the mental capacity, then they wouldn't be doing it intentionally. So I think there are some safeguards in place to address those questions.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you. Unfortunately, my experience comes from a bill that we passed a couple of years or so ago dealing with the death penalty, those intellectually challenged and those who had mental health claims that did not have a path in the court to make those claims. So unless I see something specific in terms of language in here, I'm not going to be able to support it, but I certainly support the intent. So thank you. Thank you, Speaker.
Representative Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Very well. Representative Travis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question been called. Is there objection? Seeing none, we're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2337, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does anyone wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 77, 18 nays, one present not voting.
Senate Bill 2337 has received a constitutional majority. Hereby declared passed by objection. Motion to reconsider is tabled. Leader Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to take up Tuesday's regular calendar 2 at this time.
It's proper motion, probably seconded. Any objection? Without objection, so ordered. That'd be Tuesday, the 23rd, just for the record.
Mr. Clerk, please call up the next bill.
That's Tuesday's regular calendar 2 for April 23rd. Item 1 on that calendar, House Bill 2479 by Leader Cochran relative to goods produced in Tennessee. Mr. Speaker, Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Cochran, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2133.
Representative Cochran moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2133, properly seconded without objection. So ordered. Representative Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2133 on third and final consideration.
Representative Cochran moves passage of Senate Bill 2133 on third and final consideration, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up the First Amendment.
House Commerce Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We move to adopt.
Chairman Vaughn moves to adoption of House Amendment 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of adopting House Amendment Number 1, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Cochran, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the Goods in Tennessee bill. This bill says if an issue does not fall into the bounds of federal commerce laws, which is interstate commerce, it's Tennessee's purview to regulate those goods sourced, created, sold, and utilized in Tennessee if the state so chooses to do that. With that, I will renew my motion.
Representative Cochran renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Fritz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
We have objection. We're on the board. All those in favor of previous question, please vote aye. Those no, vote no. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye 73, 18 days.
Previous question prevails. We're back on discussion. Now we're voting. All those in favor, please vote aye. No, vote no. We're voting on the bill. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye 75, 18 days.
Senate bill having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1061 by Chairman Powers relative to commerce. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Powers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1284.
Chairman Powers moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1284, properly seconded without objection. So ordered. Chairman Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1284 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Powers move passage of Senate Bill 1284 on third and final consideration, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up the first amendment.
House Commerce Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Vaughn, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I move to withdraw this amendment, I would like to bid good day to the millions upon millions of people in Ireland tuning in to our live stream today to watch this bill's passage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to withdraw that amendment.
Without objection, Amendment 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Powers. Chairman Powers, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I make a motion to roll this bill to the heel of the calendar. This calendar, sorry.
Without objection, so moved. Call up the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Senate Joint Resolution 848 by Representative Stevens, a resolution relative to development of a comprehensive statewide paid family caregiving policy and program.
Representative Stevens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to concur in Senate Joint Resolution 848.
Representative Stevens moves to concur on SJR 0848, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up the first amendment.
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Representative Stevens, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This resolution urges the state to develop a comprehensive statewide paid family caregiving policy to support with the collaboration of consumer stakeholders and advocates in support of family caregivers. This came from the Disability Coalition, and with that, I renew my motion.
Representative Stevens renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none, all those in favor of SJR 0848, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 88, 3 nays.
SJR 0848, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare concurred in. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1128 by Representative Gant, relative to criminal justice. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Gant, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 0757.
Representative Gant moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 0757, properly seconded. Without objection, so ordered. Representative Gant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 0757 on third and final consideration.
Representative Gant moves passage of Senate Bill 0757 on third and final consideration, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up the First Amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Husley, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's different from the Senate amendment. We move to adopt.
Chairman Hulsey moves adoption of House Amendment Number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of adoption of House Amendment Number 1, say aye. All those opposed, say no. Aye. Ayes have it. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Gant, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this legislation does is it is to provide data that will ensure the Attorney General has standing to bring suit against the federal government if he deems necessary. And the bill does three things. It requires a jailer and arresting law enforcement agency to collaborate to verify citizenship when a person is arrested. And I say already arrested, not because of this legislation. It requires the keeper of the jail to report persons who are not lawfully present. And it also defines not lawfully present within the United States. And the verification methods or identity that you can use to verify your citizenship is a verifiable Social Security card or number, a Tennessee driver's license or photo ID, a green card, a student visa, a birth certificate issued within the United States, a valid, unexpired U.S. passport, a certificate of citizenship, or a certificate of naturalization. And Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
The gentleman renews his motion. Any discussion? Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker Marsh. Sponsor, when would someone present this information that's listed in subsection B1?
Representative Gamp.
When they have been arrested.
Representative Pearson.
So at the initial point of their arrest, if they don't have these documents, what's going to happen?
Representative Gamp.
That would be up to law enforcement.
Representative Pearson.
So if they don't have these documents, law enforcement would not be able to put this information into any system to be able to collect it in any meaningful way for the District Attorney General's conference, which you're wanting for them to do. So if these individuals don't have the permanent resident card, a Social Security card, which I don't even carry in my wallet, or these other things, they would just continue to be processed through the system and we would never know anyway.
Representative Gamp.
Repeat that one more time.
Representative Pearson.
If a person doesn't have these things, we would never know whether or not they are, according to your legislation, unlawfully here because they wouldn't have these documents on them. Is that correct?
Representative Gamp.
Again, that would be up to law enforcement how they deem that particular situation.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. And is your understanding that law enforcement will be working with a federal agency to actually be able to determine whether or not someone is lawfully within the United States or not?
Representative Gamp.
I think you're referring to another companion bill that is traveling previously with this bill, and I think it actually reports it to ICE, I believe.
Representative Pearson.
Right. The challenge with this legislation, and again, it fits in a long line of legislation coming from this body related to people who are immigrants and people who come to our state. Again, it's talking about the criminality of people who are unlawful residents or who are undocumented. And again, 30% fewer crimes are committed by people who are non-citizens, according to a study by Stanford University. What I'm really concerned about, more than just the inability of this legislation to be effectuated by law enforcement officers and our departments, which should be focused on so many more things, including the crimes that you're mentioning have been committed, rather than profiling people to determine whether or not they are undocumented or unlawfully here, is the signals that this sends to people in our state about the view that we as a body have towards people who are immigrants. This legislation continues to purport this idea that there's a danger or a threat or a harm that is going to come from people in our communities who are immigrants. If they have already been incarcerated, as you mentioned, then it is important that we allow for the system to work itself out, but not that we have further discrimination within our system that separates people based on their residency or their non-residency. And so again, this law fits in line with a lot of other laws, too many laws that have been passed that I think are harmful, that are dangerous, and that put forward a really harmful narrative for people who are immigrants in our communities. And it is this idea that is being proliferated about their danger, about the fear that we are supposed to have. I have fear of white supremacist domestic terrorists, and a lot of them, fortunately, have been getting arrested for an insurrection that they led in the United States. But I don't discriminate against them because of that. I don't ask for additional identification because of that. I am hopeful that the legal system works itself out to be able to serve justice in that way. This, however, does have an intentional and harmful effect of discrimination that tells us or sends a signal that there are people who we need to be more afraid of. And I think that is wrong. And that's why I cannot support this legislation. Sponsor. Thank you, Speaker. Sponsor.
Representative Gamp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the dialogue. I think the purpose of the underlying issue here is this is a huge cost to Tennessee taxpayers for housing people that are here illegally. And who pays for that? Tennessee taxpayers. And who's here illegal? They are. And so therefore, we have the brunt of having to pay to house them, and that's where this legislation is coming from.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. People who are undocumented, do they pay sales tax?
Representative Gamp.
I don't understand your question.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. We don't have an income tax in the state. You pay property taxes, you pay sales taxes. If you go to a store, you pay sales tax. People who are undocumented, who spend, as somebody said, their legal tender, they pay a sales tax. And that sales tax helps to fund a whole lot of things in our state. So they're also funding our state as well. Thank you, Speaker.
Representative Gamp.
I thought there was a question there, but obviously not.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. And sponsor, you and I have had in-depth debate on this, so I won't put you through that. I just want to make sure my concerns are on the record. And quite simply, the definition for not lawfully present within the United States is defined in the legislation. And without reading all of these documents, unless one of these documents is made available by the individual to the jailer or the law enforcement officer, then they're considered to be here unlawfully and are reported to the DA or the AG, rather, as such. And I think that's two things. One is that there's too much room for error there. The other is that some of these reports are going to be faulty because you will have had people who are citizens or here legally who just didn't have these particular documents. And as I stated, if we were made reference to some of the existing definitions in the federal law, for instance, I wouldn't have as much of an issue. I would still have an issue, but as much of an issue. So with that being said, unless you have questions for me, sponsor.
I don't think he has any questions. Representative Hardaway.
I thank you for the time.
Representative Gamp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think most of us in this room have some form of identification on us right now. So that should answer your question.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. But the question is not whether we have it, it's for that one individual who doesn't have it on him and doesn't have, I believe we said that the jailer could do a facial or familiarity exception. But at the end of the day, these laws are supposed to protect everyone and not just specific people who happen to have enough forms of ID and might have the thought process to have them on them. So for those reasons, I still can't support your bill. But thank you very much.
Representative Gant.
Thank you, Representative Hardaway. We always have meaningful discussion, and I appreciate your interest. Thank you.
Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question been called. Any objection? There's objection. We're on the board. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 75, 20 nays.
Previous question prevails. We're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 757 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 70, 22 nays.
Senate Bill 757 having received a constitutional majority, everybody clerk pass without objection. Most reconsider table. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2035 by Representative Barrett relative to extreme risk protection orders. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Barrett, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2763.
Representative Barrett moves substitute conform Senate Bill 2763. Probably second without objection. So ordered. Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2763 on third and final consideration.
Representative Barrett moves passage of Senate Bill 2763 on third and final consideration. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Civil Justice Committee Amendment number 1, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment number 1 filed as House Amendment 2.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized. Oh, Chairman Halsey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same as Civil Justice Amendment. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 2 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Barrett, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this bill seeks to preempt the field of legislation in Tennessee as it relates to extreme risk protection orders and red flag laws. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Barrett renews the motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker. And sponsor, I'm vehemently opposed to this legislation. Our state legislature is now trying to preempt something that we have been derelict in our duty on doing. Many of our constituents have asked for us to pass an extreme risk protection order or a red flag law to prevent many of the heinous crimes and murders that have happened in our state. In fact, just yesterday, one of my colleagues mentioned an individual who harmed their partner after having access to their firearm. With an extreme risk protection order, that individual could have went to the police or sought the support of a judge to prevent that individual from having access to the firearm that would ultimately kill them. But instead of answering the call of our constituents who are asking for us to do something about gun violence, asking for us to end the epidemic of gun violence, asking for us to make communities safer, pass a red flag law like states like Florida passed, for God's sake. We're now trying to preempt local governments who might have a modicum of more courage and not cowardice from being able to protect their citizens and their constituents. This is what overreach looks like, but it's also extremely dangerous. If we are not going to have the courage to protect our citizens as a state legislative body, why are we taking away that power from local governments who might be more willing or might be a little more courageous than some of the people who are sitting in this room to do something to take guns away from people who might commit violent acts? This makes no sense. And this isn't a partisan issue. States that have Republican leadership have passed extreme risk protection orders, have passed red flag laws. It's the cowardice of this state the weakness of this state, the attention that's given to the Tennessee Firearms Association, the National Rifle Association of this state that has left us less safe. And now we're seeking to legislate the lack of safety from extreme risk protection orders for all 95 counties. That is wrong. And it is taking away the power of local governments to do all that they can to protect their citizens, which is what we're supposed to do. But we have failed. And we continue to fail on the issue of gun violence prevention. Over 500 people since the end of last session have been killed in our state, 57 children. Too many people are being killed by guns. And we have not done nearly enough to address this epidemic. And now, instead of bringing forward legislation, sponsor, that would address the epidemic, that would say if somebody threatens you and they have a firearm, that you could go to a judge or you could go to a law enforcement officer and make sure that they are disarmed, even temporarily so. Instead of doing that, we're again preempting local governments. Our job isn't to be up here and be bullies to political subdivisions and counties and city councils and mayors. Our job is to represent and to protect the people in the state of Tennessee. And you cannot say not having extreme risk protection orders is making anyone more safe. This makes us less safe, in this type of legislating that is not rooted in research, not rooted in the real issues that people are experiencing, the real violence that many of our communities are facing, makes our state more dangerous. And it only will persist in this way so that we continue to lead the nation in gun violence, that we're going to continue to lead the nation in the amount of people dying due to gun violence, the amount of children who are dying due to gun violence because of our inaction. And it is shame on this body for failing to act, and shame on this body for trying to take away the power of local governments to act. It's shame on this body for the deaths of people unnecessarily in our state, and we need to do better.
Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't hear a question, but a lot of comments, so I've got a few of my own. I'm a lawyer. I've practiced for 25 years. I've studied the Constitution and the cases from the Supreme Court, and I live my life by that. I swore an oath, just like you did, to uphold the Constitution. The Second Amendment and all the amendments of the Constitution, all the provisions and rights that are protected, not granted. They weren't granted by the Constitution. They're protected by the Constitution. Those rights are just as important and just as protected in Shelby County as they are in Hickman County. And just because you or the people in your district or in your city or in your county don't think that the Second Amendment is as important to them as it is to me or the people in my district, doesn't mean that they have the right to downgrade my rights or the people from my district. So I'm representing my district.
Representative, you are out of order. You're out of order and you know it. I ask you to please stop. Representative Barrett, you're recognized. Representative, once again, Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So in this representative form of government that we have all been elected to come to this body to make decisions and vote on behalf of our districts the way that they would vote if they were sitting at the desk. That's what I'm going to do. I suspect you will do the same for the people that you represent, and everybody else in this body will do the same.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor, I'm going to read the first section where it defines what we are prohibiting. An extreme risk protection order means an executive order or a written order or a warrant issued by a judge, magistrate, or other judicial officer with the primary purpose of reducing the risk of firearm-related death or injury. We are right now prohibiting local government to pass any legislation with the primary purpose of reducing the risk of firearm-related death or injury. It's unbelievable. I sat on a bipartisan gun safety committee. Many people in this room were on that committee. One of the ideas that we had was an extreme risk protection order bill. I worked with many members in this room to address their issues. We went back and forth. I've proposed at 3 different occasions bills that would allow for our state to at least have the debate. Not once has that bill been heard. Every single time I've brought it, it dies for lack of a second. So we've not even had this debate. And before we can have the debate, we're going to prohibit local governments from having that debate as well. In Tennessee right now, firearms are the #1 killer of kids. The #1. We are also disproportionate in suicide by firearms in our state. Most states, it's about 1/3. In Tennessee, it's almost 50%. I think this is a bad bill. You and I have talked about it. I have issues with preemption, with taking away local control. You yourself said that, we get to represent our people. If our people want this, I think they should be able to do it. You talked about, having statewide application. Every community is different. What the wants and needs of my community are different than yours. They're not better, they're not more important, but they are different. And to not allow the local community to do something about it, I think is a shame. So anyway, thank you.
Representative Barrett.
Representative, I very much respect where you're coming from. And we have had conversations about the bill that you proposed and this in general. Part of the reason why, in my opinion, this bill is necessary, part of the reason why I brought it is because last year we spent hundreds of millions of dollars in the budget to increase school safety. Yet your district chose not to put SROs in schools. They chose not to take advantage of some of the things that we put out there to try to make schools more safe. And so if we leave this to their own devices, what I fear is a division of the state of Tennessee upon multiple layers with laws that are different. And that's the thing about extreme risk protection orders and ex parte motions and how this all gets passed and put into law is these things can have multiple different applications and come in multiple different varieties. And so if we allow every city, every county, every subdivision of the state to adopt their own idea of what they think is the best ex parte extreme risk protection order, we're going to have people that don't know what the law is when they cross the state line or they cross the city limit line. So we have to have consistency. And as I said before, the Second Amendment applies the same and the Constitution applies the same in Davidson County as it does in Hickman County or Lewis County. And so for that reason, I think it's necessary. And you and I've also had the conversation about this bill in particular and what I think its effect will be. I understand that you want to have the conversation about what's best for the entire state. And I think this bill forces us to come to the table in the future to have that conversation.
Representative Freeman.
Yeah, thank you, sponsor. And again, I appreciate that, and I hope that happens. I guess you continue to say the Second Amendment protects everybody. We take people's rights away to carry firearms all the time. If you are convicted of a felony, you can't carry a firearm. If you are convicted of a stalking offense, I mean, there are instances all the time. So we need to solve this problem.
Representative Barrett.
I renew my motion.
Representative McCalman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question been called. There's objection. We're on the board. All those in favor of previous question vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. That's the first warning for the balcony or the gallery on the left. This next one, you're removed. Ms. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 73, 22 nays.
Previous question prevails. We're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2763 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 73, 24 nays.
Senate Bill 2763 having received a constitutional majority, everybody declare it passed without objection. Motion to reconsider is tabled. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk. Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since Representative Powers seems to have taken over the well, I move at this time to go back to item number 2, House Bill 1061, and take it up at this moment.
Proper motion, probably second without objection. So ordered. Chairman Powers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1284.
Chairman Powers moves to substitute and form Senate. Oh. Chairman Powers.
Yes, sorry. Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Chairman Powers renews motion. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, we now have Amendment 2, Mr. Speaker, by Chairman Vaughn. It was not timely filed.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to move for consideration.
You've heard the motion, probably second. We're voting for consideration of amendment number 2. All those in favor of considering amendment number 2 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 86, 7 nays.
In accordance with Rule 60B, I'm receiving necessary 2/3 vote. The motion to consider amendment number 2 prevails. Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, I owe you all an apology. I had moved to withdraw an amendment that we needed to adopt. You'll have to forgive me. It's my first go-round with international relations. I've never worked at the UN, but so whenever I handle things this important, sometimes I get a little nervous. So today, now for all those people in Ireland and the great state of Tennessee, I move to adopt.
Chairman Vaughn moves adoption of amendment number 2, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? We're voting on the board. All those in favor of adopting amendment number 2 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 94 nays.
Amendment number 2 is adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Powers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 1060, Senate Bill 1284 creates the Tennessee-Ireland Trade Commission to be composed of 11 members, of which 3 will be from the House of Representatives and 3 from the Senate. It requires the Department of Economic and Community Development to provide administrative and professional services as needed to the commission. The purpose of the commission is to advance bilateral trade and investment between our state and the Republic of Ireland, encourage mutual investment in this state and the Republic of Ireland, especially in infrastructure and human capital, and promote business, educational, and cultural exchanges between our state and the Republic of Ireland. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Powers renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm really excited about this bill, having worked for the UN. Thank you, Chairman Vaughn. But more importantly, so for those of you who don't know, Belfast is the sister city of Nashville, so I was able to travel to Ireland in December. But really excited that all of you are in favor of this because right now, Ireland, the current Democratic Party, is actually a Democratic Socialist Party that is in charge of the country, the party of Sinn Féin. And I have a constituent who's in my district who's actually the president of American Friends of Sinn Féin. And so I'm really excited about this piece of legislation and look forward to supporting it. Thank you so much.
Chairman Powers.
Thank you. And I got to go there last fall too. And the Speaker of the Senate of Ireland is the one that I talked to about this and brought this forward. And he's going to come here if we pass everything and do an honorary signing next month. So we would love to have you come. And with that, I renew my motion.
Chairman Powers renews this motion with the invite. Does anybody have any further discussion? Seeing no, any objection to the question? Seeing no, we're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1284 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. All those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 88, 6 nays.
Senate Bill 1284 having received constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion reconsiders table. Chairman Faison, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, I know I'm out of order, but I have a very dear friend up here in the gallery. Bonnie Brzezina has brought our friends Joan and Mike Berry. They're the founders of Hope for Victims from Knoxville. Would y'all make them feel welcome?
Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 526 by Chairman Haston and others relative to utilities. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill's on the desk.
Chairman Haston, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 129.
Chairman Haston moves substitute and conform Senate Bill 129, probably seconded without objection, so ordered. Chairman Haston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 129 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Haston moves passage of Senate Bill 129 on third and final consideration, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call for First Amendment.
House Local Government Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Crawford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Government Operations Committee Amendment number 1, filed as House Amendment 2, same as Senate Amendment 2.
Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 2 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Haston, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill language comes from work between several municipalities along with the Comptroller's Office. This is a small step to help municipalities, especially our rural ones, by delaying the depreciation for water lines and utility equipment purchase with grant funds by 1 year. With that, I renew my motion.
Chairman Haston renews this motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 129 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 95, 1 nay.
Senate Bill 129 have received constitutional majority. Everybody declare passed by objection. Most reconsider table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1872 by Representative Fritz and others relative to criminal offenses. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill's on the desk.
Representative Fritz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2770.
Representative Fritz moves substitute and conform Senate Bill 2770, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2770 on third and final consideration.
Representative Fritz moves passage of Senate Bill 2770 on third and final consideration, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment number 1, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Holsey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same as this Senate amendment. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 2 by Representative Pearson. Mr. Speaker, was not timely filed.
Representative Pearson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Speaker and sponsor and colleagues. You all know I'm against this xenophobic anti-immigrant legislation of which this is a part. Sponsor, I have this amendment that would take out Section B. I disagree with just about everything in here, including these whereas clauses. But particularly, I disagree with Section B because it is literally legislating discrimination for people who are undocumented in our state. You would be able to increase the amount of penalty. So in here you have what are called enhancement factors, and being undocumented would increase the enhancement factors for a person who commits a crime and is undocumented. Now, we don't have any enhancement factors if you commit a crime and you're a white supremacist. We don't have any enhancement factors if you commit a crime and it's a hate crime. We don't have any enhancement factors for those things, but for people who are undocumented, we're seeking to have enhancement factors. And so I believe that's wrong and that's immoral and unjust. And so that's why I want to strike that out and move for.
You've heard the motion, probably seconded. We're voting for consideration of amendment number 2. All those in favor of considering amendment number 2, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 22, 73 nays.
In accordance with Rule 6B, having failed to receive the necessary 2/3 vote, the motion to consider amendment number 2 fails. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Fritz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This legislation before you today, colleagues, does 4 basic things. First of all, it will enhance the penalties for an illegal alien who commits a violent crime in the state of Tennessee. It will also enhance the penalty for an illegal alien who commits a crime while in possession of any deadly weapon. And that enhancement goes up to life in prison with no parole. Thirdly, this bill will allow that any adult who goes onto a K through 12 campus in the state of Tennessee and commits a felony violent crime will suffer that same sentence enhancement of up to life in prison with no parole. And finally, colleagues, this piece of legislation allows the magistrate or judge considering bail and bond to take into consideration the residency status of the individual. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would renew my motion.
Representative Fritz renews his motion. Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor, do you know how much it costs to incarcerate an individual for a year?
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last figure that I saw on that was somewhere in the excess of $40,000 a year. I would offer to my colleague that the cost to those victims, the Lake and Rileys that we have seen, is one that we cannot measure in dollar figures. I would further offer that to take no action on this and to assume that you're going to allow not immigrants, but illegal aliens, mind you, to commit these violent crimes in the state of Tennessee or in possession of a deadly weapon without enhancing their penalty when they're already a criminal, because they've already broken the law to come into this country. And further, I would offer that to ignore the societal cost, the cost to our K through 12 schools in this great state of Tennessee, to allow any adult to go in and commit a violent felony crime and not suffer a sentence enhancement is at the very least irresponsible.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I absolutely agree. These are heinous crimes. So my question is, why are we layering discrimination on top of those violent crimes? Anyone who commits these violent crimes should be incarcerated, should be punished accordingly. This seems to be targeting, as was said by my colleague, individuals who are undocumented in this country, as opposed to somebody who committed a crime who, for anti-Semitic purposes, for anti-Muslim purposes, for white supremacy purposes, any of these things, those crimes committed by those individuals are just as heinous. Now, the question is, why do you want to spend more taxpayer dollars to discriminate against one population versus another when they committed the exact same crime? I would argue that it's blatantly discriminatory, that it's blatantly completely uncalled for. Let's point out these heinous crimes. I agree with you. Heinous. Should never be committed. The individual should be locked up. But you, instead of wanting to invest that money and lock up all the individuals, you don't want to treat, let's say, a white man who commits the exact same crime, you don't want to punish them as harshly? What's less heinous about the crime because a white man committed it versus an undocumented immigrant? What's less heinous about it just because somebody killed a Jewish neighbor for being anti-Semitic? What's less heinous about that? If the beauty of this country and this state is that we strive, we don't accomplish it, but we strive to have a fair criminal justice system. We're failing at that, but that's the goal, to apply the law equally to all men and women. Yet here we are passing a bill to discriminate against a population for a heinous crime. I fail to see, and I would love to hear your explanation as to why we would treat anyone who commits one of these heinous crimes differently than anyone else. If you want to pass life in prison for anyone who commits these heinous crimes, be my guest. But why? Just give me a little bit of insight as to your thinking as to why undocumented immigrants are being targeted here, as opposed to any other individual who would commit such a heinous crime.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank my colleague for the question. I would offer that you may have indicated your racial bias in what you just said, sir, because you used the phrase white man. And so I'm not sure if you're aware of this, colleague, but we have folks of all skin colors that are coming across that southern and northern border illegally. They're criminals. I have been to the border, not to escort illegals in like some may have, but I have been to the border to see what the conditions there are. And so I have personally seen folks of every possible skin color that are coming across that border illegally. So for your reference to a white man indicates certainly to me that you have some racial bias, which I certainly do not understand. I certainly do not understand that. I do think.
Chairman Clemens, you're recognized. Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now that I've been accused of being a racist here on the House floor, I'm going to move for Rule 19, point of order against this individual who's in the well, speaking completely inappropriately.
It's proper motion, properly seconded. I'm sure there's objection. We're on the board. Mr. We're on the board. A yes vote is for the member to proceed. A no vote is for the member not to proceed. Mr. Clerk, take the vote. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye, 73, 21 nays.
Representative Cochran, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question been called. There's objection. We're on the board. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye, 73, 19 nays.
Previous question prevails. We're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2770, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye, 70, 22 nays.
Senate Bill 2770 and received constitutional majority, hereby declared passed without objection. The motion reconsiders table. Chairman Todd, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby call Representative Jones out of order for both speaking out of turn without being called upon and for approaching the well without being asked to join. And that's a violation of Rule 19 and 18.
That's a proper motion, properly seconded. Is there objection? There's objection. The vote is, you'll be voting. A yes vote indicates that the member, Representative Jones, was out of order. A no vote is he was not out of order. Yeah. Leader Camber, you can ask parliamentary question if you want to at this point, but that's about the extent of it. All right. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the parliamentary inquiry was, could the member be called to order under Rule 19 when they had not been recognized, so they weren't violating by speaking? But the rule does say any member who in speaking or otherwise transgresses the rules of the House.
We're voting. When the bell rings, an aye vote is the member. Representative Jones was out of order. A no vote was he was not. Mr. Clerk, take the vote. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye, 69, 19 nays.
Motion prevails. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2310 by Representative Ritchie, relative to prohibited medical procedures. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill's on the desk.
Representative Ritchie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2782.
Representative Ritchie moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2782. Probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Representative Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2782 on third and final consideration.
Representative Ritchie moves passage of Senate Bill 2782 on third and final consideration. Probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
Household Justice Committee Amendment number 1, same as Senate Amendment number 1.
Chairman Russell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, Amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Finance Ways and Means Committee Amendment number 1, filed as House Amendment 2.
Chair Lady Hazelwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt, and I defer to the sponsor for an explanation.
Chair Lady Hazelwood moves adoption of Committee Amendment number 2. Probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of Amendment number 2 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Ritchie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill provides for a civil action against a person who recruits, harbors, or transports an unemancipated minor within the state for the purpose of receiving a prohibited procedure. This is a parent's right bill. Nothing more, nothing less. At the end of the day, parents should have this final say on what medical procedures their children are receiving and nobody else. It was brought to my attention when we were at a session this past fall that there are organizations and other state legislatures that are bragging that they're going to come and take our children out of the state of Tennessee to go have these procedures that are illegal here within inside of the state of Tennessee. And that brought grave concern to me. I've got a young daughter, and it would scare and aggravate and tick me off if somebody decided that they were going to try to come and grab her without me or her mama's permission. There's nothing more. These are already procedures that are illegal here in the state of Tennessee. All we're saying is that if the parent wants to take their child somewhere else, they're able to do that. If the parent or guardian gives permission to somebody else, they can end up doing that. But if somebody else comes and takes their children without parental consent, that would end up providing for civil action. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Ritchie renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Pearson.
Sponsor, isn't kidnapping already a crime?
Representative Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, if you read the bill, it's not creating a crime in this legislation. This legislation would provide civil action so that the parent or guardian could go after the individual that took their children. But yes, kidnapping is a Class C felony currently.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. So you're gonna, if somebody steals anybody's kid, if somebody stole my kid, haven't had them yet, but if somebody stole my kid, I would definitely want them going to prison, because it isn't just about a procedure, is that they kidnapped your child. Like, that's the problem. Like, your child got kidnapped, period. So this legislation, again, and it's a companion bill to the one yesterday, I think Jason or somebody put up, that was related to abortion and penalizing people who would help a unemancipated minor get access to health care that they may be being denied. But could an individual, and I think there's an exception here, such as an uncle or something like that, be able to get their child care or an individual's child care within the state for sort of a procedure that is legal? Because what it looks like you're trying to address is that there are procedures that are illegal in this state, and that this law is to prevent people from being someone who gets kidnapped and also gets an illegal procedure. It gives those parents the ability to sue. But if the procedure is illegal in the state, and I'm thinking this is a euphemism for abortion, I don't understand the need for the law, because we have one of the most, if not the most restrictive laws as it relates to healthcare for women. We have one of the most restrictive laws as it relates to children who get raped being able to access an abortion. We have one of the most restrictive laws as it relates to women getting the care that they need in our state since the Dobbs decision. And so it's illegal in our state in almost every case for an individual to get access to an abortion. And so what illegal procedure is it that you are targeting in this instance in your legislation?
Representative Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Section 1 of the bill, Tennessee Code Annotated Section 6833-103 A2B, that is addressing the transgender procedures that are prohibited inside of the state of Tennessee. It has nothing to do with abortion. This has to do with those prohibited procedures that are under that particular section. So when we end up looking at why this is important is at the end of the day, the parents, like you said, kidnapping is wrong. It's a Class C felony. We initially passed this through the beginning phases or the beginning committees with this having an additional criminal offense. It would be a Class C felony in addition. And one of the questions in committee was, well, since there's already a Class C felony for kidnapping, shouldn't that be suffice? I wanted to have those two charges in there because if somebody's coming and taking our kids, that's completely wrong. So, but due to the financing and the budgeting portion on that, we ended up amending that off to be able to still provide for the civil action that a parent or a guardian. You'd mentioned about an uncle potentially being able to do that. The only individuals that can provide consent under this legislation would end up being the parent or legal guardian who has the authority to make medical decisions.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. So transgender care that's articulated in this legislation is already prohibited in our state. Is that correct?
Representative Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Correct. It is prohibited in this state. What this ends up doing is providing civil action for anybody who takes a minor without parent or guardian consent who resides in the state, attempting to take them to another state to where it would be legal. So it's not addressing the concern as far as where they're taking it somewhere, taking a child or a minor inside of the state of Tennessee. It's already prohibited here. There would be other consequences if there was a doctor or facility that's ended up doing that. This right here is to block those individuals from kidnapping our children and taking them across the state lines.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you. I think this is pretty absurd of a piece of legislation. Again, this idea that somebody's kidnapping folks' children for them to get the care that they need if they are transgender or queer is insane, and it is not happening. And I think these penalties, again, send a signal, just like these previous laws, against people who are LGBTQ+. It is a bad bill. It is a bad law. It is a bad precedent, and it's not something we should be doing or supporting.
Representative Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Representative Bain.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, I was cut off speaking on a similar bill. So instead of pursuing the values or moral perspective of this piece of legislation, I'm going to try a different approach. Representative Ritchie, do you consider yourself a constitutionalist?
Representative Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, I consider myself an American. I consider myself a Christian. I consider myself a husband this upcoming week of 20 years. I consider myself a freedom-fighting veteran who served honorably in the United States military. There's a lot of members that are on this floor and across this state that have never had the opportunity to be able to raise their arm, to be able to swear that oath, be deployed and be away from their children. So whenever I end up coming back here, I took an oath to the citizens of my district, come up here and fight for the things that are important to them, that are dear values to them. The values of your district probably don't look and match up with the values of my district. So I represent Blount County. I represent part of Blount County. My colleague over here, Mr. Representative Chairman Moon, represents the other half. I love the Constitution so much that I've sworn oath to it twice now. I'm not a career politician. This is only my 17th month of being elected. But as a constitutionalist, I think there's a lot of different ways you can go there. The Constitution was written to give us a guideline of what we would want to end up seeing this experiment take place. And with that, I want to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to make sure that our children, our greatest assets, are protected. And when it comes to somebody coming in and openly admitting that they want to make their state the transgender reassignment state of America, and they said, if you live in one of the states where these procedures are prohibited, we'll come and pick you up, and don't worry, if your parents don't know, we'll still come and get you. That is upsetting, that is unnerving, and that was an elected individual in another state that said that in a press conference. That's why this legislation is in front of us right now. So I want to make sure that we're protecting our parents, making sure that they have the final say. If a parent wants to take their children to another state where these procedures are legal, by all means, they have that right because of the freedoms we have in this country. They don't have the right to do it here in the state of Tennessee because that was prohibited last year, but this bill has nothing to do with those prohibitions. This legislation has everything to do with parents and legal guardians who have the medical authorization ability for those minors to have the final say on whether or not that child can go across the state line to go get these procedures. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what I consider myself.
Representative Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the effort filibustering your own bill and answering the question. This bill is inherently unconstitutional. So if you're familiar with the U.S. Constitution, there's the 14th Amendment Privileges or Immunities Clause, in which the Constitution protects the right to travel across state lines. If you're familiar with the Dormant Commerce Clause, the legal doctrine says the Commerce Clause in Article 1 of the Constitution not only allows congressional regulation of economic activity between the states, but also forbids states from creating interstate economic barriers. This bill is inherently unconstitutional. It restricts travel of Tennesseans. And I don't pass bills criminalizing families and transgender children in your district, but you're doing that to mine and my family. And my final question for you is, aren't you all tired of giving money to the ACLU with all of these lawsuits? Come on, y'all. Tennessee taxpayers deserve to spend money and reinvest that back into their communities, not giving it to the ACLU. This bill will be challenged in court. I'm against it for a plethora of reasons, but I just wanted to highlight that in case any future litigators are watching this live feed. Thank you.
Representative Ritchie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As far as the constitutionality of this particular piece of legislation, couldn't disagree with you anymore. When you end up looking at what this actually does, you mentioned that impeding travel across state line or whatever is illegal. This bill does not do anything of that. If you end up looking and actually reading what the language is, this just provides civil action for a parent or guardian against somebody who takes their child without consent across state line, which is kidnapping to begin with, but this would end up also in allowing them to have that civil action. Renew my motion.
Representative Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question been called. We'll just automatically assume it's objection. We're on the board. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. That one. That one. Just the one. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye, 75, 20 nays.
Previous question prevails. We're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2782 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye, 75, 21 nays.
Senate Bill 2782, having received constitutional majority, hereby declare passed by objection. Most reconsider table. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2302, by Chairman Howell, relative to criminal offenses. Mr. Speaker, Senate bills on the desk.
Chairman Howell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2116.
Chairman Howell moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 2116 without objection. So ordered. Chairman Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 2116 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Howell moves passage of Senate Bill 2116 on third and final consideration. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Howell, you're recognized. Oh, Chairman
Thank-
Halsey, you're recognized. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same as the Senate. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, Amendment Number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Howell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, House Bill, this bill is known as the Ben Creedich Act. It came to me from Senator Massey in Knoxville, and it involves a young man who had autism. He had been here to the Capitol numerous times, had advocated and testified before some Senate committees, advocating for people who suffered from the same malady that he did. Tragically, Ben was struck and killed by an impaired driver while walking on a sidewalk along Kingston Pike in Knoxville. The driver of the vehicle was weaving on the highway. Unfortunately, he went on the sidewalk and hit Ben and killed him. But the driver had recently come from the hospital where he had been administered Narcan. He left the hospital, got in his car, and began driving. Narcan is a prescription medication which is commonly administered to reverse opioid or drug overdoses. And while it often does reverse the symptoms and can save a person's life who has overdosed, the drug can still remain in a person's system. This is from research by NCSL, also from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. So what this bill does is authorizes a first responder who administers Narcan to a person to notify that person of the risk associated with driving within a 24-hour period, and makes them aware that they could be ticketed for driving while impaired. And if they are stopped by law enforcement and they're weaving, such as the driver was doing, if they're seen by an officer and are stopped, they can be ticketed for driving while impaired. And it's put under the DUI code of 5510-401. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Howell renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objections to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 2116, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 97, no nays.
Senate Bill 2116 and received constitutional majority. Everybody declare passed without objection. Motion reconsider table. Next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 2943 by Representative Towns, relative to indecent exposure. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Towns, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, members. I move to substitute conform to Senate Bill 1811.
Representative Towns moves to substitute form Senate Bill 1811, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Representative Towns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I move passage on Senate Bill 1811 on third and final consideration.
Representative Towns moves passage of Senate Bill 1811 on third and final consideration. Probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1, same as Senate Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Halsey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same as the Senate. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, Amendment Number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Towns, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, members, thank you. This bill comes from my Senate, actually my senator. It's Senate Bill 1811, expand the offenses of indecent exposure. This happened, something happened in her district with her neighbor where there was an event that happened at the house of a bunch of young girls, 13, 12, 14. And the father of the girl where the event occurred, he asked his daughter to go take a hike and go to bed, and left her girlfriends out there. And he began to do things that are unspeakable and unmentionable, so to speak. But because of the way the law was, it did not allow them to prosecute him because the age was 13. What this bill seeks to do is to take that age up to 17. So that person would have been able to have been prosecuted for exposing himself and doing the things he did at that house of the young girl who was no longer even present. His daughter was in the bed. With that, Mr. Speaker, I ask to renew my motion.
Representative Towns renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question being called. Is there objection? Seeing none, we're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1811, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 97, no nays.
Senate Bill 1811 having received constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk. Leader Lamberth. Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
I move to take up Wednesday, April 24th's calendar, the single item that is on that calendar.
Proper motion, proper seconded. Any objection? Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Clerk, call first bill.
House Bill 587 by Representative Gant and others relative to driving under the influence. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Gant, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1055.
Representative Gant moves substitute and form Senate Bill 1055, probably seconded without objection, so ordered. Representative Gant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1055 on third and final consideration.
Representative Gant moves passage of Senate Bill 1055 on third and final consideration, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call First Amendment.
House Finance, Ways and Means Committee Amendment Number 1, same as Senate Amendment Number 1.
Chair Hazelwood, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same as the Senate amendment. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, Amendment Number 1 withdrawn. The next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 2 by Representative Pearson, Mr. Speaker, was not timely filed.
Representative Pearson, you recognized.
Thank you, Speaker. And this is, as honest as I can be, a friendly amendment. I'm against the legislation because it increases incarceration. But there is something all of my colleagues should note on the fiscal note from the Fiscal Review Committee, and maybe you can address this to sponsor. But if you looked at the corrected version, it says increase local expenditures, $633,500 for year 24-25 and subsequent years with an asterisk. So I looked at the asterisks, and it says Article 2, Section 24 of the Tennessee Constitution provides that no law of general application shall impose increased expenditure requirements on cities or counties unless the General Assembly shall provide that the state share in the cost. Currently, this legislation does not have the state sharing in the cost. It is against our Constitution. It's already on the fiscal note. And so for those reasons, I put this amendment on to say that the state would share in the cost so it could be in the appropriate posture. But I'm still voting.
You've heard the motion, probably second. We're voting for consideration of Amendment Number 2. All those in favor of Amendment Number 2 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 22, 73 nays.
In accordance with Rule 60B, having failed to receive necessary two-thirds vote, the motion to consider Amendment Number 2 fails. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Gant, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this legislation does is if you are pulled over for a first-time offense in DUI, this lowers the blood alcohol level from being prosecuted from a 0.20 to a 0.15. And if your blood alcohol level is in between or above 0.15, instead of spending 48 hours in jail, you will spend 7 days in jail. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I move passage.
Representative Gant renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Shaw, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor yield.
Representative Gant, he does. Representative Shaw.
Who will pay for this? I would like to get a little better understanding as to who's going to do the paying.
Representative
Gant. Good question, Representative Shaw. Unfortunately, this does come out of our local government.
Representative Shaw.
Have you, and I can appreciate your legislation, but have you talked to our local governments about this and how they are going to handle this? And have they prepared to handle this?
Representative Gant.
I've had numerous sheriffs across the state call me about the issue of drunk driving in general, and I've not had one call me and say they're against this legislation because of the cost.
Representative Shaw.
Have you talked to my folks? You and I are very close together over there. Are you at liberty to talk about what counties have said yes and those that have said no?
Representative Gant.
I don't offhand, but I mean, we can go back and we can have a sidebar conversation. I'll be glad to set you up with those individuals and y'all can have that conversation.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have a problem with your legislation, but I really would like for my local folks to know about this because it's going to cost something, and I would like for them to know what they're up against before I vote for over $600,000 bill to be sent that way. And I realize that's across the state, but I'd just like to know more about what the real cost is going to cost, because I know right now we are short of deputies and folks are not getting paid what they need to get paid to be deputies and all. And I'd just like to get a better understanding of that.
Representative Gamp.
Representative Shaw, I've had numerous conversations with our sheriffs that we have in our districts and about many aspects of this problem, including this legislation, and there's been no reservations whatsoever. And matter of fact, I was in Bolivar at a town hall meeting, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, which you represent the city of Bolivar, and we both represent part of Hardeman County. And not one time in that town hall meeting where we had citizens from across Hardeman County there, not one time was this, no one was speaking against it.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm going to go on your word. I don't have a problem with your legislation, but you know, if they come at me with a hammer, I'm going to tell them to look for Representative Gant, because I just want to make sure that I don't put anything there that shouldn't be. So I'm just going to take your word for it, Mr. Rep.
Representative Gamp.
Thank you, Representative Shaw. I'll take the hit for you.
Lear Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I did just want to be clear, what we're talking about is going from a .20 enhancement to a .15. These are folks that are double the legal limit. They've been convicted of driving under the influence, and as a general rule, a DUI first offense is going to carry 48 hours of minimum, mandatory minimum in jail. 7 days is the enhancement that we're talking about. So the difference of 5 days is minimal to any one jurisdiction, but it makes a massive difference on the impact of that individual who was severely intoxicated. We're not talking about folks that are just barely over the legal limit. These are people that are double the legal limit or right there at it. It's a good bill. I appreciate you bringing it. And unfortunately, my friend, given what you have had to suffer through and the brave journey that you have made back to join us on the floor here, I appreciate you obviously making it your mission to try to make sure that there are fewer victims and fewer survivors of drunk driving crashes out there and intoxicated driving crashes. Thank you for your work on this.
Representative Gamp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I honestly wish the person that gets that first DUI, I hope him sitting in jail for 7 days gives him a little bit of time to think about what he did. And there's a lot of people that are affected by drunk driving that are killed, their spouse is taken, their children are taken. And here's an opportunity for us to send a strong message that we want you to think long and hard for 7 days before you think about getting behind a wheel drunk again.
Leader, good. All right. Representative McCalman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question be called. Any objection? Seeing none, we're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1055 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye, 79, 4 nays, 11 present, not voting.
Senate Bill 1055 under received constitutional majority. Everybody clerk pass without objection. Most reconsider table. Members, we have 2 messages before we break for lunch. 2 messages. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Speaker. I move to take up today's message calendars.
Proper motion, probably second. Any objection? Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Clerk, call first message.
Mr. Speaker, on the message calendar, House Bill 1754 by Chairman Reagan, relative to Department of General Services. Mr. Speaker, we have a conference committee report.
Chairman Reagan, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This conference committee report is about the sunset bill for the Department of General Services. In December, the Judiciary Government Joint Evaluation Committee for Government Operations recommended a 4-year extension for the department. The House went with that recommendation and passed the bill unamended. The Senate wanted to change that extension to 1 year. The compromise we have worked out in this report is a 2-year extension to 2026. And that's all this report does. It simply extends the Department of General Services 2 years instead of 4. I move that we adopt the conference committee report and make it the action of the House.
Chairman Reagan moves adoption of the conference committee report and make the action in the House. Any discussion? Seeing none, we're voting. Any objection? No. All those in favor of conference committee report, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 93, no nays.
Conference committee report having received constitutional majority, I hereby declare adopted and made the action in the House without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, we have received a new message from the Senate from today, a message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I'm directed to return to the House Bill 2261, substitute for the Senate bill in the same subject, amended and passed by the Senate.
Representative Wright, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the original bill, a Tier 2 house or a Tier 2 home was where 4 or 5 unrelated adults resided in primary residential setting with medication control by a physician, advanced practice registered nurse, or a physician's assistant. The amended bill includes licensed practical nurse and registered nurse that comply with Practitioner Practice Act, and I move to concur in Senate Amendment number 1.
Representative Wright moves to concur in Senate Amendment number 1, probably seconded. Representative Parkinson, you recognize.
Thank you, Chairman Wright. Just in layman's terms, so a fifth grader can understand it, what are we agreeing to with the Senate? Are we adding nurse practitioners?
Representative Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There were 3 titles in the original bill. There are 2 added titles in the amendment.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you for that.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of all those in favor of Senate Amendment number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 98, no nays.
Senate Amendment number 1, having received constitutional majority, I hereby declare concurred in without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that's all the messages we have on the desk at this time.
Chairman Clemens, you recognize. For what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to remind the Democratic Caucus members that we are finally going to take our class picture on the north steps of the Capitol right as soon as we adjourn. I know you're hungry, but please come down there. The quicker you get there, the quicker we'll be done. Thank you.
Leader Lamberth, you recognize.
Speaking of hungry, members, you've been at it for quite some time now, and at this point, I move that we stand in recess until 3 p.m. today.
It's a proper motion, probably seconded. Any objection? Without objection, 3 p.m. All right, so when we come back, we got 28